what is happening in South Sudan is that, when you see the international media, this one is written national dialogue. The president has done a national dialogue talking that people should talk, but the national dialogue is inside. The rebels, no one is talking to them. I was asking the letters that I exchanged with the people who are in the national dialogue. I was copying Tomo, he has. I asked very serious questions, very tough questions, very dangerous questions for my life, and they could not answer. I'm saying, why should we deceive ourselves? Umar al-Bashir used to do this when we were rebels in the bush. He would say, there's a national dialogue, and then they do it from within, not talking to the rebels. And we are in the bush. How are you going to achieve peace if you are not going to talk to the person outside? It's just for eating and for buying time and, getting some budgets and nonsense. Meanwhile, under the national dialogue, you in the world, if you go to the media which are for the government, you will see the national dialogue. But under the national dialogue, what is happening? People are being killed by the militia. Raping. I shared with Tomo a certain link where the government, one of the news, the government is telling its soldiers just to rape and kill and loot because they don't have salary. The government doesn't have budget to give salary to the militia. So he's giving them the leeway to loot and rape women and so on. This is the situation. It is not something that you are hearing first-hand information. I don't need to give you references because it is me who is experiencing them. In my community up to yesterday, in fact in Mapel where we were, in my village, I told you that we used to go in 1970 something. Yesterday, the militia killed one of the youth in Mapel. Now the youth of Mapel are saying they want that person who killed their youth to be brought to justice. If it's not brought to justice, they are going to fight. So I'm sure in the next few days in Mapel there is going to be a lot of bloodshed. The government might send their militia and burn houses and kill people. This is what had happened in the other community of the Balanda. The government sent people there. And who should help? Who is to be blamed? Even if we are not to blame somebody, at least who should help? Who should help that situation? Whose responsibility is it? It's our responsibility all. If I were to be given a chance to talk to the European Union, I had written a letter, I would have shared it with them. We all bear the responsibility, except the victims. These are the only people who are probably don't have any share of the responsibility. I can say I bear responsibility because I was in the government. I failed to convince our government to be good for the period that I was in the government. So what needs to be done is just to come out of the hibernation. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights started in Europe here. And how did it start? It started when some people saw massive human suffering after the Second World War, during the Second World War. Then they came up together and they made that declaration, Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Now we feel like we are not part of that universal. Europe is just saying Universal Declaration, but when the death and the mass killing and all that is happening in Africa, no one seems to be bothered much about that. We need to waken up that conscience, that conscience, the heart of those original Europeans who started the universal, who made the declaration. Their conscience went to asleep. Is hibernating. You know hibernation. When it is very cold here, some animals hibernate. So the conscience of humanity went hibernating. Probably we hope that with the coming of the winter, we were in winter. Now we are going to summer. When the coldness goes away, they will come out of hibernation. We hope so. You see, we are now moving away from coldness. We are a few days into the nice weather. And when this is happening in South Sudan, then what do you think will be the situation of the Nuba and the Darfurians, whereby you have to pass through South Sudan to reach them? Now we are talking of famine in South Sudan. No one is talking about Nuba in the news. No one is talking about Nuba. You see, you never know what happened there. And what made me meet with Tomo was actually the Nuba people. I was a manager of a huge humanitarian organization in the region called Upper Nile, and this is a region where Nuba were displaced. I had visited them. I took various photos that touched me so much when I look at them. I shared them with my bosses so that we respond. Because I was working, I was in charge of humanitarian support, so that we respond to this Nuba guy. But because of politics of NGO and government and large humanitarian organizations like World Food Program and the UN, we could not respond. We were not supposed to respond. It's very complex. We talk of humanitarian imperative as one of our values, which means if there is humanitarian situation, then you have to go. You have to help, irrespective of what. But that is not the case. It is just on the paper. When, in actual fact, when there is a need to respond, we don't respond because of some rules that are tying us, you see. When Tomo came to me, he was desperate. He wanted to go and see these people, just by coincidence. It happened that I was there. I had a report, which I had shared with my bosses, and nothing was done. I gave him the report and the pictures, and I helped him to go there. I wanted to help him through my organization, but it was not possible. He went there. Now, the situation there, it was hunger by that time. It was 2014. Me, I was taking their pictures in 2013. Then I met Tomo in 2014. I don't know what the situation was there, but the famine that we are now talking about in South Sudan today has been there. I talked to their chiefs, and what they were telling me is that they have been bombarded for the last 2 years, and they have not been able to cultivate. All the seeds have been eaten, consumed, seeds for farming. They do subsistence farming. So this year, they saw that there is going to be death of starvation. So they moved and came to Kodok, where I got them. I gave that report to Tomo. And when we just discussed, that is when we realized that we have a lot in common. We are feeling, sometimes me, and I realize when him, sometimes we feel helpless. I feel completely helpless. You see, you cannot do anything. There are so much forces. And I'm sure even the European Union Parliament members, they cannot do anything. There could be some members among them who want to help, but European Union as an institution has its own agenda, has its own interests, its own fears and worries that should not be touched. And that is what puts the brakes to everything, you see. We need to think how we can change this way of living in the world, you see. We may be happy, but as long as another person somewhere is not happy, it will one day reach us here, like it has reached already from the Arab world. I heard that Tomo has been talking about that. A lot of refugees are coming. It is not a very good sign. We may not come from Africa, we may continue dying there, but that sleeping conscience, that sleeping heart will suffer, will be tormented always, all the time. Because we are all human, we are Homo sapiens, then we are all supposed to care for one another. Maybe I should stop here. If there is any question, somebody want to ask anything, any additional elaboration, I can do. Thank you.
I'm not sure, did you mention United Nations? Can they help or not really? I mean, it's more global. Or...
Yeah, you know, United Nations is a huge corporate. It's a corporate organization, huge and corporate. You know, there is something called diseconomies of scale. When an organization becomes big, even action becomes very big. Yeah? In mechanics, a huge body needs a bigger force to even make it start. This is what happened to humanitarian. They can help. They are trying to help now. But the question would be, if they help, this is a very important point. If they help and give humanitarian relief this year, and the farming community are not farming. These people you saw being killed, thousands of them, more than 200,000 are living in United Nations camps, protecting them from our own army and the militia. Otherwise they would be dead by now. So these are farming communities, crop farmers, they cannot farm. So humanitarian, and others are moving. More than 1 million are in Uganda. Around 500, more than 500,000 are in Kenya. A lot are in Central Africa. They are not able to farm. Those who remain in town elites like you, who are in town now, are depending on food coming from Uganda and from where. So if the United Nations give them food this year, what about next year and the other year? That is not a solution. It is just a temporary solution to save lives of people not to die now of starvation or famine. But permanent solution need to be made through political intervention, political solution, so that there is peace. This man of ours, our president, now is a cowboy to his own people. This is my town. It has its own blood and all that. The people are running to Khartoum. This is written Khartoum in Arabic. They are running to Khartoum, our former enemies. And there the ladies are crying. Why? The man has become a cowboy. Our president has turned into a cowboy. This is what they are saying. And running away, all of blood. Now, this man needs to be made to allow people to go back to farming. That is the solution. Yeah.
So famine is connected with the government exterminating the farmers.
Yeah.
Can we say so?
Yeah, disturbing all the farmers in their stability. You know, for you to farm, you need to be able to stay undisturbed for a number of years. You plant, you clear, you do the crops, you weed, you harvest. It's a whole year process. So you need to be stable, even psychologically stable for you to farm. Now they are not able to farm. This one is also a cartoon. I made it one day when I was so low in spirit. They are just asking, they are wondering, what happened? These are, you know, the bushes of South Sudan are full of bones of our veterans who died. They are our fallen people. They are not buried. You see? So in the bushes there, they are wondering, did we die for this situation? This is what they are asking themselves. And probably there are others who died for that. The others who died before, because they thought they are supposed to dominate others. They are supposed to replace al-Bashir and the Arabs. It's like, that is what the other guy is saying. We died to just preserve chaos and lawlessness. Something like that.
But that was the politic in the north. The ones who supposed to the government of North Sudan, so it's the whole Sudan, they call them Arabs. They said we are Arabs because, who knows, identity is a question of interest. Mainly they are Arabs because they are getting money from Arab countries like Qatar or Saudi Arabia or even Iran to do the mission, to exterminate the indigenous people, the blacks from Sudan. That was the politic and the tactic and the strategy of the northerners. Can we say that now the southerners are doing the same?
They have learned.
The Dinka, now the government.
Exactly.
The government belongs to Dinka. Dinka are the government now, isn't it?
As you can see, the people have drawn even the skull, they who were wandering in the bush. They have these lines that look like, these are tribal lines. It's particularly the Dinka. Dinka is the largest tribe, the largest ethnic group in South Sudan today. The president is a Dinka. So the majority of his officials, all the important positions, the commander of the army, the minister of finance, important ministries, if you look among the representatives of South Sudan outside in the consulates, they are called what in English? Ambassadors. 90% of ambassadors are from Dinka. 90% of the commanders of the army, the commanders of security, the people in charge of more main offices are Dinka from this tribe. They are the people who are satisfied, and you see. And one important thing to note is that these are just elites. The majority of their tribe members are suffering even more because they are nomads. They don't cultivate. So most time of the year they have less food security. Most period of the year. They don't have enough of it because they depend on animals, they don't cultivate a lot. So these elites are victimizing them too, because now in South Sudan, everybody is hating Dinkas. But it is because of their elites. The commoners down at the grassroots level are just suffering like any other person. You see, they are misled also by to think, this is our government now, the people are against us. When I ask that, why is there injustice? Why is there no fairness? Then they will accuse me that I'm being tribalistic. The president appoints 95% of the ambassadors to be Dinkas. The rest of the 63 tribes share the 5 remaining ambassadors. Then when anybody asks, then you are accused of being tribalistic. If such accusation could actually hold water, then it should be the government to be accused of that. How can you forget about we have 64 ethnic groups in South Sudan. The national cake should be shared together. Even if the Dinkas are majority, then they have been given. They are not 95%. Yeah. If they are 40% or they are 35%, then they should get 35% of the national cake, the national budget. Now our national budget, more than 70% of national budget goes to security, to the army. And most of them are the ones holding those important budgetary positions. And that is why there is no peace. In the history of humanity, peace and injustice don't exist together. They are mutually exclusive. They don't, that is why in South Sudan there is no peace, because there is injustice. And in the world, if there is injustice also, then there will be no peace. There is a lot of trade unfairness in trade relations between the African countries and European countries, third world countries and first world countries. That is unfairness. The Western countries sometimes maintain a leader who is oppressive to his own people because they fear change. They don't know who is the next person who is going to come. They fear loss of control. That is fear. It means they want to perpetuate injustice, to maintain injustice. That is very bad. As long as there is justice, as long as there is injustice, there will never be peace. At least human history tells us that. This one is our president and his national dialogue. South Sudan is bony, dying of famine, and the president is forcing national dialogue down the throat. But can you feed somebody when you have grabbed the neck like that? Will he be able to swallow all that? He may not be able. You see how he has grabbed the neck of strangling him, and at the same time he wants him to swallow. That's the problem. Yeah, this is you see, our president, and this also can be the world, is blindfolded with fear and greed. Blindfolded. When you are blindfolded, how can you lead? Now the Western world is leading the nation, America and Europe. If they allow themselves to remain blindfolded, not to see facts, like being presented by Tomo sometimes, in his books, in his moves, and they continue blindfolded and they are leading the world, then where are they going to go? They may fall into a cliff. And when they fall, what is going to happen next? Next force is going to come. The world has been like that. One civilization falls, another one comes up. This falls, another one comes up. If the Western civilization falls today, another one may come up. Which one is likely to come up? Maybe the Islamic civilization, ISIS.
China.
Huh?
Maybe China.
Maybe China. You see? So we are not sure of what may come. If it is ISIS that comes up, then we are going to have Holocaust all over the world. And that is what I'm worried about, because all throughout my life I've been struggling against Islamic attacks on me, Islamic aggression into my own nation. So I'm a bit worried if people are blindfolded. We, the academicians, we need probably to help the leaders of the world to remove that fear. They are blindfolded by fear. And how can we do that? How can we help the world remove?
Wait, I would throw bombs if I would believe that bombs can change. But as we saw on 11 September 2001, the bombs made just opposite effect than I wanted. There's more fear, no? Because the two towers went down. There is national security everywhere. That's the best business. National security. All these agencies are making the biggest money now. Anywhere in Africa, you want to get money from European Union or United States, you just inform them through your channels that there is some problem with terrorists, these Islamists are coming, and they will send you. Also, the next business are refugees now. You want money, you can say refugees are crossing on our way to Europe, to you, across Mediterranean, and the European Union will give money to stop these refugees coming. So these guys in Africa and Middle East, they are getting rich on the death and suffering of children and women particularly. So I believe this world is changing into cannibalistic world, and we will all suffer. I mean, I would recommend one book to read to understand South Sudan and North Sudan. That's the famous book by Sven Lindqvist, Exterminate All the Savages. This book can help very much to understand the tactics and strategies which are today happening still, and they are continuing. I can feel the patterns, why the West is behaving so unsupportive for you, other 65 tribes in Sudan, in South Sudan, isn't it? And also in the North Sudan. Everywhere, I mean, indigenous people are suffering. Here and there, they are directly exterminated. In some other places, they have no equal rights. Somewhere, they are putting them into the natural parks with reservations, where they also do not developing the same speed as the others. Whatever we go, which way we go, we develop whatever.